I didn't say a word when my daughter told me I was embarrassing her guests. I just nodded, picked up my coffee mug, and went back to the basement. That was a Thursday in February. I remember because the cold had been brutal that week. The kind of cold that cracks the caulking around old window frames and makes you wonder why anyone chose to settle this far north in the first place. I'd been living with my daughter and her husband for about 4 months by then. I'd sold the house in Sudbury the previous September, after my wife passed. 41 years in that house. I watched both my kids take their first steps on that kitchen floor. I taught my daughter to drive in the driveway. And then Patricia was gone, and the house was just a building, and my daughter called and said, "Dad, come stay with us for a while. You shouldn't be alone right now." I believed her. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I genuinely believed her. My daughter's name is Cassidy. She's 34. She married a man named Joel 3 years ago, and they have a nice house in the west end of Ottawa. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, 2-car garage. Joel works in federal procurement. Cassidy does something with digital marketing that I never fully understood, even when she explained it to me. They don't have children yet, though they'd been talking about it. When I arrived, Cassidy hugged me at the door for a long time, and I thought, okay, this is going to be fine. The basement was finished, laminate floors, a small bathroom, a pull-out couch that converted into a bed. There was no window that opened, but there was a window well, and in the morning a thin strip of light came through it. I set up my books on the little shelf next to the washer. I hung Patricia's photo on the nail that was already in the wall. I told myself, "This is temporary. You're grieving. You don't need to make permanent decisions right now." For the first few weeks, it was fine. I cooked dinner twice a week because I wanted to pull my weight. I was the one who knew how to make a proper stew, a real roast chicken, the kind of stuff that takes 4 hours and fills the whole house with something that smells like belonging. Joel said, more than once, that he hadn't eaten this well since his mom used to cook Sunday dinners. I took that as a good sign. I don't know exactly when it shifted. That's the hard part. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a drain gets slow. You don't notice it for weeks, and then one day the water is just sitting there around your feet, and you realize it's been getting worse for a long time. By December, I was cooking every night. I'm not sure how that happened. I think it started because Cassidy mentioned once that she'd had a long day and it would really mean a lot if I could have something ready when they got home. And I did. And then she had another long day. And then Joel mentioned that he'd been swamped and hadn't had time to stop for lunch. And so I started making lunches too. Sandwiches, leftovers, packed into containers in the fridge, labeled with masking tape. And then one morning Cassidy asked if I could throw in a load of laundry before I left for my walk. And I did, because I was going to walk past the laundry room anyway, and it was just one load. Except it wasn't one load. It was every load after that. Mine, theirs, Joel's work shirts that had to be hung immediately or they'd wrinkle, Cassidy's delicates that had a whole separate process she explained to me once very quickly and then assumed I'd memorized. I did memorize it. That's what gets me. I memorized it because I didn't want to cause trouble. By January, my days had a routine that had nothing to do with what I'd imagined my retirement would look like. I'd get up around 6:30, start the coffee, the good stuff, because Joel had opinions about the coffee, and then I'd figure out what to make for dinner based on what was in the fridge. Then I'd do laundry or clean the kitchen or vacuum the main floor, because Cassidy's schedule was busy, and the house needed to be presentable, she said, in case anyone stopped by. Then I'd walk. Then I'd come home and prep whatever I was making for dinner. Then I'd eat with them, or sometimes alone if they had plans, and then I'd go downstairs. I was, without anyone explicitly deciding it, the housekeeper. I didn't say anything. I kept telling myself it was my way of contributing, my way of earning my place. Patricia used to say I had a bad habit of solving problems by going quieter. She wasn't wrong, but I think I also just couldn't name what was happening yet. It felt ungrateful to name it. Here were my daughter and her husband, letting me live in their home, and I was keeping the house running. Wasn't that fair? I might have kept telling myself that for a lot longer if it hadn't been for a Sunday in late January. Joel's family came for dinner. His parents, his brother, his brother's girlfriend. 7 people, including me. Cassidy asked me on the Friday if I could make something nice. Not just weeknight food, she said, something special. I said sure. I spent most of Saturday on it. Short ribs braised in red wine, roasted root vegetables, a proper Caesar from scratch, 2 loaves of bread, and a butter tart square because Joel's mother had mentioned once that she loved butter tarts. I set the table. I folded the napkins the way Patricia used to, the little fan shape that takes about 30 seconds but looks like effort. I polished the wine glasses. And then, about 20 minutes before everyone arrived, Cassidy came into the kitchen and said, very casually, that she'd been thinking, and it might be a little crowded with 8 people at the table, and maybe I'd be more comfortable eating downstairs tonight. I looked at her. She didn't look away. She just waited. I said, okay. I made myself a plate, covered it with foil, and took it to the basement. I sat on the edge of my pull-out bed and ate short ribs I'd spent 2 days making, alone, listening to the sound of laughter from upstairs. That was the night I started to understand what was actually happening. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't start the coffee. I sat in the gray winter light coming through the window well, and I thought about Patricia, and about the house in Sudbury, and about a version of myself I'd been slowly setting aside. I'd spent 40 years as a structural engineer. I'd managed projects, crews, deadlines. I knew how to read a situation, and I knew when a load-bearing wall was hiding behind drywall. What was happening in this house wasn't complicated, once I let myself see it clearly. I had been useful, and because I had been useful and quiet and undemanding, I had become invisible. That's not the same as being loved. I had confused the two things for months. I didn't say anything that day, or the next one. But something had changed in me, like a hinge that finally loosened after a long winter of sticking. In the first week of February, I made a phone call. An old colleague of mine, we'd worked together on a project in Canada back in 2009, had been renovating a small triplex he owned near Carling Avenue, and I remembered he'd mentioned once that he was planning to rent out the units. I called him. He said he had one that would be ready by March 1st. Ground floor, 1 bedroom, in-unit laundry, a small backyard that got afternoon light. The rent was $1,900 a month, which was fair for Ottawa. I said I'd take it. I didn't tell Cassidy. I know some people would say I should have. I know the Thursday night version of me, the one who nodded and went back to the basement, would have immediately felt the need to explain, to smooth it over, to give everyone time to prepare. But I'd had a long time to think, and I'd realized something. Every time I tried to talk about how I was feeling in that house, the conversation somehow ended with me apologizing for taking up space, for having feelings about it, for being a complication in a life that had been running smoothly before I arrived. So I did something different. I started packing a few things at a time, slowly, the way you'd move water from one container to another without making a sound. A box of books down to my car on a Tuesday morning, my winter coat, and the good tools from the shelf by the furnace on a Thursday. The photo of Patricia, carefully wrapped in a flannel shirt, slipped into a bag while Cassidy was on a call upstairs. The 1st of March was a Saturday. I got up at 5:30, before anyone else was awake. I loaded the last of my things into the car. 2 bags, a box of kitchen items I'd brought from the Sudbury house, my shaving kit. I wrote a note and left it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. The note said, Cassidy, I've found my own place and moved out this morning. I'll be in touch. Love, Dad. That was it. 10 words and a closing. I drove across town in the dark, and when I pulled up in front of the triplex on Carling and sat there in my car for a minute looking at the lit window of the apartment, my apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like myself. I spent that first day putting things where I wanted them. There was nobody's schedule to work around, nobody's preferences to accommodate. I put my books where I could reach them from the armchair. I put Patricia's photo on the windowsill, where the light would hit it in the morning. I went to the Loblaws on Merivale and bought groceries. What I wanted, only what I wanted, and I came home and made myself a real breakfast. Eggs, toast, strong coffee the way I liked it, not the way Joel liked it. By noon, I hadn't thought about the laundry even once. My phone started ringing at 11 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. Cassidy's voice was careful at first. Dad, just wanted to make sure you're okay, call me when you can. The second message, an hour later, was less careful. By the 5th message, she was crying. By that evening, she'd called 9 times. Over the following week, she called 31 times. Some of them I let ring. Some of them I declined. I wasn't punishing her. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't sitting somewhere enjoying her panic. I was doing things. I was taking a walk along the Rideau Canal. I was reading for 2 hours without stopping. I was figuring out where the light came through my new windows at different times of day. I was, for the first time since I'd pulled out of Sudbury that September, making decisions that were only mine to make. I called her back on the 8th day. She cried. She said she hadn't known things had gotten so bad. She said she hadn't realized how much she'd been relying on me. She said that she and Joel had talked about it, and they agreed they'd handled things badly. I believed her. I believed she meant all of it, in that moment. But here's what I said: Cassidy, I love you, and I'm glad you understand. I'm not coming back, and I'm not angry. I just needed to remind both of us who I am. There was a long silence on the line, and then she said, "Who are you, Dad?" And I said, "I'm your father, not your housekeeper." She didn't have an answer for that. We've talked since, several times. It's careful, the way things are after the foundation of something shifts. She's come for dinner twice. At my place, my table, food I chose to make because I wanted to, not because it was required. I buy the kind of wine I like. The visit ends when I feel like it should end. I walked her to the door the second time, and she hugged me for a long time, the way she had when I arrived at her house in September, except this time it felt different. It felt like she was holding on to someone who had a choice. I'm not lonely. That's the thing people assume, and I understand why they do. But I was lonelier in that finished basement, listening to a dinner party I wasn't allowed to attend, than I have been for a single day in this apartment. Loneliness isn't about being alone. I know that now in a way I only suspected before. I joined a community woodworking shop on Richmond Road that runs open sessions on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I've been going since mid-March. There are about 12 regulars, retired guys, a few younger people, a woman in her 50s who's building her own dining table from white oak. Nobody needs anything from me there. We just make things. I've been thinking about Patricia a lot. Not the sad kind of thinking, or not only that, more like conversation. I talk to her photo some mornings, the way you'd catch up a friend on what's been happening. I told her about the apartment. I told her about the woodworking shop. I told her I finally bought the good coffee and stopped apologizing for it. I think she would have found that last part very funny. I spent a long time in that basement, believing that being needed was the same as being loved. I made myself smaller and smaller until I fit into whatever space was left after everyone else had taken what they needed. And then I picked up and left, on a March morning before the sun came up, and drove across a quiet city to a room that was mine. You don't have to fight your way out of something like that. Sometimes you just have to walk.